what happens when the church clashes with the law and the law doesn't allow the church to operate in the way that it should? Watch this video.
A pastor in the city of Bryan was arraigned this morning for housing the homeless in his church. Pastor Chris Avell, he pleaded not guilty on 18 counts. Those charges included zoning violations for running a church that sheltered the homeless. The law states residential use in first-floor buildings in a business district is banned. The pastor tells WTOL 11 he was just doing his God-given duty.
This is what the Word of God teaches, is to take care of the widow and orphan. And we have widows in our church, and we've had people who, they may not be kids under the law, but they're orphans. And this is how I worship my God. And I just want to be able to worship my God.
The pastor is expected back in court within the next 30 days.
All right. Welcome to the Church Dropout podcast. My name is Alan. I'm the host, and I'm with
Lisa.
Thank you guys for tuning in. A pretty interesting story here. This is a short clip. There is a larger clip that's out there. I believe CBN News did a longer clip where he kind of explains a little bit more as to what's going on, but I just chose to use this one. I'll link the other one inside of the show notes. But I think this is interesting, especially as it relates to where the modern church is in terms of, how we, I guess, how the church functions within the laws of the nation that we live in. Right. And one of the things that I've been really big about is the relationship with the church and quote unquote the state, just in terms of, the church being a little bit too cozy with the state and the government, I guess is a better way of putting it, with the government in terms of abdicating its role or giving into government mandates. We've seen some of this when it came to COVID and stuff like that. Churches had to wrestle through, do we listen to the government or do we listen to God? Right. Now, here we have a situation where a pastor is being criminally charged. He's being criminally charged. 18 counts. Some have to do with violations, ordinances, and different things of that sort. But he's being criminally charged because he's running a ministry that helps homeless folks. It's an actual church. They're a 24-hour church. Yeah. And they actually help people within the community, not just people who are homeless, people who are maybe victims of domestic violence or anything like that. People need shelter. People need food. They actually serve the community in this way. Yeah. Now, the city is coming against them saying, you can't do that. And you need to stop doing that because you're violating ordinances and different things of that sort. So before I ask your opinion and your thought, because I do have some thoughts at the end, but one thing I thought was pretty interesting is that the city at one point, or city officials at one point were sending people to that church for help, right? Like, when a police officer may pick someone up or, may go out on a call and, maybe a wife or a husband or whomever needs some type of assistance, they would actually point them to this actual ministry. And now, they're being told that they can't function this way. And so my thing is like, this is a prime example to me of, the church being told what to do or how the law shapes how the church is able to function. So before I give my thoughts on that, like, what are your thoughts? What do you think about this? And, I don't know, what stood out to you?
Well, the first thing I thought about is when there's hurricanes and national, disasters going on, and they send people to places like churches or gymnasiums or, things like that are not built to do what they're doing, why is that okay? Yeah. To me, somebody that's homeless or in a domestic violence situation needs some type of shelter is the same situation. Yeah. So I just don't understand why, all of a sudden, they can live on the street. They can, not have any of those zoning issues and,
Yeah.
and none of that. That's fine.
Yeah.
But no, don't be somewhere where you have a roof over your head. You're probably getting food. You're probably getting support to be able to move on to the next level in your life.
Yeah. This
You know
seems
what I
like a
mean?
good thing.
Yes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Not just the helping of people, but then
Yeah.
also getting people off of the streets and
Yeah.
homeless folks. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And then the hypocrisy of it's okay to do it in these particular circumstances, right? In state of emergency, but it's not okay to do it, out of a ministry call.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah. It kind of got me thinking along those lines as well, in terms of, one, why are they doing this? And I think they asked him this question on another video,
Mm-hmm.
and he believes it, maybe someone who just doesn't want to see the church do that in the community, who's making these complaints.
Mm-hmm.
But
Maybe somebody in the neighborhood or wherever the area of the church
yeah,
is probably infringing on, maybe there's restaurants around there or
yes,
something
yeah,
like
because
that.
I do think he's in a maybe a business park or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just I think this is going to become more normal,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to become more hostile for the church to be able to function like the church in today's culture.
Mm-hmm.
I think the church has gotten quite comfortable with not being persecuted. And I'm not talking about just persecuted in the way of lifestyle, different things of that sort, but being persecuted for what it believes. The church has become very comfortable living in a nation that, quote unquote, believes the same thing or aligns itself with the values of Christianity. But that's changing. I mean, that's changing. When we start to think about the church of the future, I think this is going to be the norm, that the church is going to have a hard time really being the church in culture.
Right.
Because there are going to be laws and things that prohibit the church from actually living out its mission. And the question is, what does the church do?
Right.
Right? What does the church do? And this is why it's really important for the church to maintain its identity outside of relationship with, the government.
Yeah.
Because the church needs to be able to move, maneuver, and pivot, and even go against if that's necessary.
Right.
I mean, I think it's clear that, at least it's clear to me that the church operates in a way that obviously pleases the higher law, which is the law that God gives versus the law of the land. But I think there are some who would see a problem with this, right? That he's breaking the law, right? They would, turn to passages like Romans 13, that talks about, God ordaining the government and that we should listen to the government. They would try to use passages like that to, say, hey, no, he's in error here, or he needs to, submit to the government authorities. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that's a misapplication of the passage itself, but I think it's also a misunderstanding of the identity of the people of God. So first, let me just say this real quick, just about that particular passage. I'm not going to exegete that whole passage or anything like that. But Romans 13 does say that God puts governments in place to execute his judgment in certain areas of the world, right? So it talks about specifically about punishing evildoers, right? So the government in part is there to ensure that people are safe and that evildoers are find justice from a worldly perspective. So the government has a role.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that passage, where that passage is placed, or what that particular idea, where it comes in that passage. Because if you think of Romans chapter 13 and you look at Romans 12, he's talking about renewing your mind, all of that good stuff. And then he talks about renewing your mind and then doing the will of God. And then he talks about doing good. He goes on to say, in doing good, he says, love people. Like that's the primary goal, is to love others.
Yeah.
And he says some very interesting things. He says, do not repay evil for evil. Well, think about that, right? Even think about that just in relation to us as a country.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says, do not repay evil for evil, right? And then he goes on to say, vengeance belongs to the Lord. But basically, after that, he goes into Romans 13, which says, the government is there to do God's work in the world. So this is the point, though. This is why that's actually being said. What Paul is saying and what God is saying through Paul is that the church has a very specific job. And the job that Paul is saying the church has is to love people and to bring the gospel into the world and to not act as the world acts, but to act opposite of the world acts. And let those other institutions that God has set up repay evil for evil, bring vengeance into the, you understand what I'm saying? Like, exercise God's judgment in the world.
Right.
That's a better way of saying it, right? And so he's saying, listen, I've removed those things from you. You don't have to do those things.
Right.
You're just free to be the church, right?
Free to love.
Free to love. And so here we have a guy who's fulfilling the mission of the church that God is calling all of us to fulfill by being the hands and the feet of Christ, by being the salt of the earth, by preserving and uplifting and loving in his community. And then he has now the government coming against him to keep him from doing what God has called him to do.
Yeah.
And the dilemma is does he keep doing it? Or does he not? And obviously, I think the answer is no, you keep doing it. Why? Because there's a higher law that we answer to.
Right.
And if we're not careful as Christians, we're going to continue to get put in situations like this, even though this may seem little. We're going to continue to be put in situations where we're going to have to choose who our allegiance is to, right? Are we going to follow Jesus or are we going to follow the government? Are we going to do what Christ said for us to do, or are we going to follow the government? And then furthermore, I think even talking about that, if we don't switch our identity, if we don't reshape our identity to be more aligned with what Christ has called us to do and how Christ has called us to behave, we won't even act in the world the way Christ commands us to act in doing these things, because we'll say the law says X, Y, and Z, right? So I'm going to say something that this is just me. But, when we talk about individuals who are here not legally, we'll stand behind the law and say they're breaking the law as if, therefore, we don't have a call to love people because they're breaking the law.
Yeah.
But there's a higher law that God gives us. Right? That calls us to love people, regardless of what position they're in, regardless of what place they're in. I'm not making a political statement. I'm making a theological statement. This is what God has called us to. And so, bless this brother, who's being persecuted by his city, right? It's called Dad's Place is the name of the church. They're a 24-hour church.
It would be a blessing if other churches came alongside him and helped him.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Not only, with just support, and like being there or saying, hey, this is wrong, what's going on, blah, blah, blah. But also, maybe, helping him get, a shelter or something that can help him continue that ministry.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why we're talking about it, is to bring some light to it.
Yeah.
And here's a church, here is a gathering community that's actually functioning like the church is supposed to function in the world. And they need resources.
Yeah.
And again, like it's called Dad's Place. You can look it up online. I'll drop the link below. I think they have a Facebook page. From listening to him, he seems like a pretty solid guy.
Yeah.
But the reality is that this is the opportunity for the church to be the church in the world. And this is a picture, I think, of where the church is going in terms of how God is going to call us to live out our faith in a world that's hostile to our beliefs.
Yeah.
Because if we really lived Christianity out, like if we really lived biblically, then we would live hostile to the place that we live. We would be doing things radically.
Right.
That's dangerous evangelism. That's dangerous evangelism, right? Because it costs you to have to live and to lean into those things in a way that might even affect your personal freedom.
Yeah.
This is why I have such a respect for missionaries and individuals who go to these remote places to share the gospel, who give up their life to go to places that they can be killed simply to share the good news of Christ. And so, like I said, we'll put all of the information down there below. But I thought this is a good example of where the church should be. It's also a good example of what I think the church is going to face we're going to start being persecuted for doing the things that we're called to do.
Yeah.
We're becoming a secular, and again, I think we're already there, but we're becoming, in some people's minds, a secular nation.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? Where the values that we were comfortable with are now starting to vanquish and be gone. And now it's going to be an opportunity for the church to stand in that. And will we stand? And then to support brothers and sisters who are actually doing ministry in the world, who are actually, demonstrating the gospel in multiple ways.
Yeah.
How can we come alongside in more ways than one, whether that's financially, whether that's through prayer, or whether that's by example, by doing the same things in our communities with the churches that we gather with in order to change the world. So,
real quick, I have an idea.
What's that?
You know that story that we did, or the video that we did on the church that was paying all those fines for the noise ordinance?
Yeah, we never released it though.
Oh, okay.
I have it. I just never edited or released it.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I was going to say it'd be a good idea for that church to take all those fines that they basically budgeted, take that, turn their music down a little bit, and just donate to this church.
Well, listen, honestly, I think that would be a great idea.
Very good.
I mean, the reality is they spent $31 million on a building. I think it was 31, maybe.
It
somewhere.
was up there. Yeah.
But again, this is a prime example of how the church should be functioning in the world, right? Like, this is what the church should look like.
Yeah.
It should look like something that reflects the community, that reflects the needs of the community, that applies the gospel, not only in word, but in deed, and shows people what the living Christ looks like.
That's the key word, indeed.
Indeed.
Yes.
And here we have a church that's doing it. So support in any way that you can, but let us know what you think. Let us know if you believe that, I don't know, maybe you believe that they should stop doing what they're doing because the government is saying stop and they're not being faithful. I don't know. But I would love to hear what you think. And we'll continue the discussion in the comments. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Church Dropout podcast.
Good night.
Night.